saved by one. So
Look at this tunnel.
dedicated with that weight on it to be able to hold it back, that would be scary. Imagine it breaking loose; it'd be chaotic. A long time ago.
Sweet gravity. This started out as a mule path that Francis Moran rode his mule up. And then over time it just kept getting bigger and wider, and people kept doing more work to it. To your left is dry Minelet Creek. It don't run all the way through like it used to when I was a kid, but whenever it rains, it runs all the way through.
What do you think? Erosion, or what do you think stopped it?
Sinkholes.
Gotcha.
A bunch of sinkholes just fell in back there. So those who have been here before, you might note that we have 4 new tombstones made out of sandstone that we put up and replaced the limestone rock that didn't have any names on them.
Right. Excellent.
And we still got one that we don't know who it is for sure. Still a limestone rock down there.
Way down the bottom.
Now there's some limestone rocks that are footstones, but those we know who they are.
This is such a neat
You know, your dad and my dad was very close friends.
Oh, yes. We're going to hear a story about Cub.
Okay.
Okay, he knows he's going to talk about Dad. Okay. Okay.
Well, Cub was an expert slingshot shooter.
I knew he was talented.
He hunted squirrels with a slingshot.
Oh, really?
And so him and Daddy were up in Detroit at some point in time, and they were hungry. And so Cub got his slingshot, says, "Come on, we'll go out to the park." It was that, I think they call it Grand Isle Park. Is that right,
We're not
Michigan
from
people?
Detroit.
I think it's called Grand Isle. And he said they got out there and Cub got to killing squirrels with his slingshot, and Daddy was watching out for the park ranger or whatever. Anyway, they got a mess of squirrels and took them home and cooked them up.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
But
Dad was
people had rough lives back then. We're so prosperous now. We
I'm
just don't
telling
appreciate
you.
it like we
But
should.
you-
And for those of you that haven't been here before, the cemetery began here and went down the hill. These are young people that died before Joseph. So these were the first graves in the cemetery. And then Daddy and Mama died, and they're buried here. Joseph and his 2 wives.
And we're
The first
descended
one
from
died,
which
and
one?
then he married again.
Yeah, the first wife was that we were descended from. What was her name?
Rachel Carter.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And for those of you that do genealogy, just let me tell you, there's a death certificate on Violet Roberts that says Rachel's last name was Smith. As you know, death certificates are notoriously full of errors. And the person that was the informant was like a son-in-law or something, and he didn't really know what he's talking about. But further research shows that her name was Carter, Rachel
Geez,
Carter.
I don't have that. I have it down as Smith.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people still do, because and that the only place that Smith comes from is Violet, her daughter's death certificate. Well, so anyway, Rachel dies. We got that marriage certificate on her and Joseph, and then what year did she die? 1848. And we can't find no marriage certificates, but by the 1850 census, Joseph's got Mary, his second wife, we hope, with him. Well, we know they were married because she got a dowry out of after she died, and there was 275 acres they laid off here for her out of 1,000 acres that Joseph was supposed to have. And she lived a few more years and died. Then you come down to the next line. So that's the first generation there, and some of the second generation. And this is Francis Marion's portion here, and that one is his infant kid, and we think this one here probably is also, but we don't have any documentation for that.
That's a very interesting story about how you found that was an infant child from another record of the
Yeah, so Sarah, the mother, is doing an affidavit for someone else's Civil War pension. And she is certifying that this person was born at a certain time. And she says, I know it was because my kid was born the same year that the war started or whatever it was. So that's how we got the date. We knew she had a kid born then, so that's all we know about it. And this one here, we don't know. I'm pretty sure because these are both infants, and they're buried flowing on down. And then Francis Marion, my great-great, he married Sarah Richardson, which was just up the creek about a mile. I think all of us are from Francis Marion, aren't we? No? Sorry, Beverly. He was the best line. No, I don't know about that for sure, but he did stay in the area. Some went here, some went there, some frittered away their land and all that, but Francis Marion held on to his land. He stayed here, and all this land that the Roberts Road and all that was property that he accumulated or held on to.
along with his sister Violet.
Francis Marion, and he took care of his sister Violet.
Because her husband was killed in the Civil War, right?
She was, well, he died in 1873 after.
How much land is there? Like, do you know?
There's a whole bunch. You mean that Roberts is on?
Yes.
When he died, he had 1,000 acres. But the kids, they sold it. They sold their shares to each other and to other people, and then someone wound up not paying taxes on 750 acres that they lost. And then the people that went to, somebody else didn't pay their taxes, and Francis Marion and Violet bought that back from for taxes paid too. So there was probably 1,000 acres between here and Hickey, from Boma to Hickey, that belonged to them. There's 275 acres here that was a dowry. It abutted 320 acres in that direction, and then some smaller tracts, and then another 320 acres going all the way down to Hickey. You know where Hickey's at?
Yes.
Okay. And,
So one thing that I'm not really very good at geography, as my dad has to drive me around and tell me all the time. But one thing that my grandfather used to tell my dad, as you drive through Hickey on Old Baxter Road, on that way, my grandfather used to say, oh yeah, they owned all of this land. And now, when we've been doing research and studying, we've been finding how the deeds were all the way up. And we also...
exaggerated, quite frankly, at the time.
At the time.
I knew they were down here, but I didn't know they were all the way down to Hickey.
And it is true. It's been proven through not only deeds, but we've also gotten when the railroad went through, they had a thing called evaluation maps, and it showed who owned the land on both sides of the railroad. And we did that research when we were doing Violet Roberts. But you can see how the Robertses came up through Hickey and through Boma, butted up with the Lees, and anyways, it's just been very interesting. I'm not a best map person, as Dad tells me, but I have learned a lot. The Robertses owned a lot of around here.
Wow.
Well, the way I came by it, I was in the Air Force and gone most of the time, but when I would come home, my dad got in his mind, he couldn't read or write, but he wanted to know where all of his great aunts and uncles were buried and to make sure they had a tombstone. So every time I'd come on, he'd drag me out in the woods somewhere and we'd find some old tombstone out there, and I'd document it for him. And then all of a sudden I became interested, you know. And but Joseph's tombstone and this tombstone for Francis Marion, we assume was put up by Francis Marion's wife, because her death date wasn't on here. all the others' birth date and death date, but her death date was not. So we said, okay, she put the rocks up. And so we put her death date on here after the fact. And you know, there's so many interesting stories. So Sarah was a Richardson. They're over in North Carolina. She's an only child.
Is she the one from Heiser? Heiser Valentine?
I'm sorry?
That's his sister brother. Her father was a Heiser, right? Heiser.
William Heiser Richardson was her father,
That's right.
and Sarah Goslin was her mother.
Right.
And he died in the Mexican War.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Didn't come back from Mexico. And Angela sent off and got a military tomb rock for him. And we had, you know, it's like this, only you can't drive. So it was down in the woods on the creek. And so we had a little ceremony putting up the rock. But Sarah's an only child over North Carolina. And her daddy dies. And in those days, the infant children that was below a certain age were orphaned, even though they had a mother. And the court would appoint some man to be the guardian. So they appointed a man to be her guardian, look over, make sure the mother took care of her. And the mother evidently fell in love with the guardian, and they got married. So then at 18, she sues her mother and stepfather because they stole her inheritance. I don't know if that's true or not, but she won the case,
It was a court
okay?
case.
And there was a lot of slaves involved, and so she sells the slaves and they come to Tennessee. That's her mother I'm talking about, not Sarah. I probably misspoke there. And they homesteaded right up the creek here. He goes off to the Mexican War and dies in the Mexican War and leaves her with 10 kids. I mean, they're living peacefully down here on Minelet Creek. The Mexican War comes along and he says, I'm gonna leave you and the 10 kids. I'm gonna go down to Mexico and fight a war.
And takes his son with him too.
Yeah, it takes his oldest son, which the oldest son did survive the war. But the Richardsons, they were more rambling than the Robertses. They just continued to go west, eventually all the way up into Alaska gold fields, you know. Yeah, they went out through Indian territory and married some Indians, and then they went on out west in the gold rush, and then on up to Alaska. And they just couldn't settle down. And there's not many of them around here right now.
So they were obviously, she was a very strong-willed woman at 18 to do that.
I don't think there was anything but strong-willed women around here in those days. They were tough.
We got a lot of strong-willed women in our lines, and so you know that Sarah,
Yeah,
she
but
probably gets some credit for some of that.
well, the Roberts men have tamed most of them, though.
Pardon me?
The Roberts men have tamed most of them.
I'd have to interview them.
Katie, smile.
I am thinking.
We were talking about the homestead and we were talking about Minelet Creek and the 3 forks of Minelet Creek and all of that. So hopefully I explained that correctly.
Well, this is Minelet Creek, and the homestead, Joseph's homestead was, you can't see it now, but there's a little field over there on the other side, and that's where the homestead was. And,
Which branch of the Minelet Creek are we on then? If we have 3.
well, you're in the main branch. It don't fork till it gets on up.
Oh, great. That's good.
And, it
Last
ran
time
into,
we were here, there was water going through. Not this time. Huh?
yeah, when it rains, the water runs through, but right up, I don't know, 100 yards up, it'll have water, but it all runs into a cave. And the further up the creek, there's sinkholes that it all runs into.
Oh, okay.
I know this might be a female thing, but when you can go down there and it's not so weedy and stuff, and you go over there and you imagine my dad says that there was rocks of the homestead over there.
A couple of logs
Round.
I plowed around it.
So we know where it was at, and you go over there, and if, let's say it's a fall day or like the foliage is not up, it is so peaceful and so beautiful. And I can really imagine that, you know, I imagine in my mind that Rachel thought this is a wonderful home to live. I can imagine
Protected.
that. So that's what I think.
Well,
Because it is beautiful down here.
they
It
had
really
to work
is.
so hard all day long, every day, except Sunday, and to make a living, to keep them starving to death. And that's why a lot of them don't even know what their birthday is, you know. I mean, nobody told them, and they didn't write it down because they couldn't write, maybe. So I have a lot of respect for them. A lot of respect for them. And I joke about the gender thing. You know, there was I say to everybody when they're trying to make their family righteous and holy, I say, well, I don't know about y'all. I come from a long line of sinners. And so you look on the male side and you look on the female side, and there was both kinds. Those that sinned a little and those that sinned a lot. And there's so many interesting stories and all that. And I don't try to pass any moral judgment on it. I'll let God sort all that out. But there was, well, there's a lot of interesting stories. Frances Marion had 6, I'll use the polite term, illegitimate kids. And I have found that was so in just about every family, 1 or 2 at least.
Yeah, long history of infidelity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're just like, that's what you do.
Yeah. Well, and at different times in history, I mean, somebody said, well, so they behaved back then just like we do now. I said, yeah, except, and here's the big change, and I'm preaching a little bit now, they knew it was wrong and they were ashamed of it. His one consort, or whatever you want to call her, they lived just down the creek here, about a half a mile, so we had 3 by her. She was a Martin, so those of you that are from around here know Martins. Most of those are Robertses. But when Amanda Martin, when their kids got old enough and she told them who their daddy was, she gave them the option of what name they wanted to choose, Martin or Roberts. There was 2 boys and a girl. One of the boys chose Martin, one chose Roberts, and the girl married a Roberts, so it didn't matter. Anyway.
And you may remember Amanda Martin because 2 years ago we talked about John Harrison Roberts, one of Joseph's sons. She was actually first married to Frances Marion's brother.
Yeah, and I don't know if we should even log those as illegitimates against Frances Marion. His brother was married to her and had 1 kid, and then his brother died. So he said, well, I've got to raise up kids for my brother, and so he went and raised up kids for her brother, just like the Bible teaches them to do.
Well, the Old Testament, that's what they did. They get married
I don't know if
7
Frances
times.
Marion was that righteous there, Dad.
And then he had 3 by Macaulay, excuse me, a Macaulay woman that lived up out at downtown Roberts Switch. He
What
had
is
3.
amazing to me is the patience of Sarah Ann Richardson that she would have put up with that. I mean,
You know, that's, see, today though, it's different because women have so much more opportunity today.
Yeah.
They don't have to put up with it, right? But if you look around in those days and say, I'd be better off staying where I'm at, so I'll put up with his infidelity.
yeah.
I think that happened a lot.
And if you think
Well-
about it, many of the women had to deal with, and all of Joseph Roberts' daughters had to deal with the fact of post-Civil War, Civil
Yeah.
War and post-Civil War.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of men around.
That's right.
And I'm not saying that justifies their infidelity, but I'm saying that these women had children. Some of their husbands died in the Civil War,
Yeah.
and they were like thinking, how do I not starve to death? How do I protect my children and not starve to death?
Right.
And so I'm not saying it's right, but I'm saying that there might have been women who did things that they felt they had to do in order to survive the Civil War aftermath,
That's right. It was a terrible aftermath.
especially in this area.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was right.
I know you emphasize that.
Okay.
And I have a theory based on not just their family, but others that my wife and daughter don't subscribe to. These women got pregnant every year or every other year, and they'd have 15 or 20 kids. And I think some of them, and I believe Sarah might have been one, they got tired of having kids. And they told their husband, just go do whatever you got to do, leave me alone. And I think that happened a lot. And I can't judge any of them. But let me, this last tombstone down here is the most important one.
And the home was right down here.
This is Tommy and Gracie Roberts. That's where we intend to be buried, and my cousin Jimmy Roberts asked if he and his wife could be buried down here, and so people, now that we've cleaned it up and you can drive down, more people are interested in it.
It's
And
beautiful here. It's
my
what a
son's
place.
wife's mother died. I think they're going to throw some ashes around here somewhere. Okay. But down this path here, which I don't want anybody to go down anymore, it's too dangerous. So if you look down there, you can see the fence post down through there that I put up beside the path. And right there where you can see that last one, there's a cave to the left. So during the Civil War, everybody on Minelet Creek fought for the Union. And when they would come home to try to kill a hog for the family or whatever, they couldn't sleep in the house because the Confederates might come up and kill them. And so French Marion would come up here and sleep in this cave at night. And then he could look out right across the creek there and watch his house and whatnot. And that worked for him, although some of it didn't work for him. They'd find them anyway and kill them.
I was just chuckling to myself about thinking about how many stories of hidden gold there is in caves. And my dad had a metal detector, and we went down there and went over there in the homestead and didn't find anything. Well, we found a couple little pieces of iron
I wasn't
over
looking
there.
for gold. They didn't
No.
have no gold. But he had a blacksmith shop right over there, and I was looking to try to locate exactly where his blacksmith shop was. I thought there might be some iron laying around. Yeah, there's they didn't have banks, and so they did keep their money, but they didn't have any money to keep.
Hey, Tommy, could we ask everyone how we're all related? Like this young man over here, I don't know who he is.
He ain't related to us.
Yeah, I ain't no kin.
He's a
I'm just
hanger
tagging along.
on to
That's my
Rachel.
boyfriend.
And you are?
Related
I'm
distantly.
Rachel. My great grandmother was Zola Roberts.
Okay, okay,
Yes.
very good, very good. Excellent.
Go one more generation further.
And her father was Mansfield Roberts.
Okay, okay.
Go one more.
Then you're going for
William Joseph Roberts was
Okay.
his father.
Okay.
Yeah, William Joseph. I'll talk more about that at 1 o'clock today. Joseph, they had naming patterns back then that they followed. The oldest son was named after the father's father, and so on and so forth. So consequently, Joseph had 9 kids that reproduced, and they followed that pattern. So he has 7 grandsons named Joseph.
Did not know that they used that.
That's an
method.
interesting pattern.
Isn't that helpful, genealogy?
Oh, very helpful. And that's the last creek I jumped to make my conclusions, which I'll talk about at 1 o'clock. That's the conclusion, because they follow those naming patterns. First son is after the father's father. Second son after the mother's father. First daughter after the mother's mother. Second daughter after the father's mother. They didn't, and then they got into uncles and stuff. But as the further down you go, the less they followed that. But they were pretty strong on the first son. But sometimes they also named the first son like William Joseph. That includes the father and a grandfather.
Covered two with one son.
Yeah, and one of them named it, what was it, George Henry, which was his wife's father and the husband's father. So sometimes they kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah.
But also, I didn't know this till recently when I was researching for my 1 o'clock thing. The article I read, who was supposed to be an expert, on patriarchal naming. He says in 1700 in England, all the male childs, 90% of the male childs was named amongst 8 names.
Wow.
And of course, William, Henry, and John, which is the 3 for, it just complicates everything. So when I was trying to find Joseph's daddy, we know his daddy's William, or we're told his daddy's William, but then there's 16 Williams in North Carolina at the time he's born. Anyway, I ramble on. Let's get out of here.